This is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. All you had to do is look at other countries. I think now it's in almost 120 countries all over the world. No, I've always viewed it as very serious. I call it the unseen enemy. You call it, there's 1,000 different terms for it, but whatever, it snuck up on us. And it did 128 countries. I think it's in something like that, very close to that. Think of that. So it spreads violently. It's a very contagious, very, very contagious virus.
Welcome back to Morning Joe. You know, I don't want to keep talking about testing, but I'm going to keep talking about testing because I just read this from Garrett Hake, Willie, and Mika. Due to a shortage of tests, Ohio's Governor Mike DeWine says coronavirus testing is limited to healthcare workers and those already hospitalized. Garrett goes on to say lack of tests around the country remains a huge story. We are still flying blind. Again, Willie, our economy is being destroyed right now because instead of having testing, we're just having to shut the whole thing down. It's the only responsible thing we can do because we have failed so miserably. Our government has failed so miserably in having these tests provided. Somehow, we're supposed to believe that South Korea is a more advanced nation than the United. No, South Korea took the tests from the World Health Organization, and other countries took the tests from the World Health Organization. We refused. We botched the tests. We're still flying blind. So instead of knowing what cities are infected or who to isolate, we have to isolate 300 million people or risk 2 million deaths, all because we still don't have the tests. And Willie, we were guaranteed, if you want a test, you can have a test. Yep. And yet Mike DeWine from Ohio is now saying, no, citizens of Ohio, we have no tests for you. You're out of luck. The only people that can have tests are healthcare workers and those already infected.
And you know what else South Korea did? Yes, they took the test from the WHO, but the moment they knew this was coming, and this is back in January now, when it was happening, starting to happen in Wuhan, starting to happen in China, the South Korean government got all the private companies into a room, in a conference room, in a train station in Seoul, and they said, this is about to be a crisis. We need tests, and we need them now. Go. That's your new job. That's your objective. A week later, 1 week later, these private companies in South Korea came up with a test and they distributed it. So South Korea has gotten its arms around coronavirus, not by locking down their society, not by sheltering everyone in place, but by getting out early and getting people tested so they know who had it and they can isolate those people and not shut down their society. We're well beyond that. And if the president, Joe and Mika, believes he is a wartime president, as he said yesterday. Well, a wartime president is a wartime president from the beginning when he knows it's a war, which in our case was back in December. If you thought it was war, you would have gathered all those people in a room in a train station or the Situation Room and said, go find a test. You've got a week to do it.
Yeah, and Joe, the president said he knew it was coming. It's almost worse when you look at it that way. I mean, that's just malpractice. You know something like this is coming, and you do nothing. That's what he's telling the American people. He did nothing from the get-go. Well, there was reporting from Politico that the reason why he didn't want the test out, he thought it could be contained, and he also, the reports were that the president thought the higher the numbers, the worse it would be for him politically, the worse it would be for his reelection. But Jonathan Lemire, I've been saying the past is the past. Let's worry about the future. This will obviously, all of these quotes, all of these video clips will come out in the fall. But that said, the past is the past. We only can work with what we have right now. But we've been saying that for a week right now. I've got to ask, who is in charge at the White House other than the president? We hear Jared is in charge at the White House. Why do we still not have tests? We keep getting promised 1 million tests here, 1 million tests there. Yesterday, we heard reports from a health official that we don't have a lot of the supplies that are needed to apply the test. Who's in charge? Because I'll guarantee you that
I could give you 10 business people that could be in charge of this that would literally say, get me a test in a week. Go. And even if it were a little longer than a week, they would be on war footing, like FDR. He basically sent Detroit to war, and Detroit helped win the war. What's happening in this White House? Why are we still hearing this BS about ventilators when it's just BS? Why are we hearing BS about testing just around the corner when it's always proving to be BS? When is somebody going to finally be in charge and get these tests to the people of Ohio who need it, to the people of Florida who need it, to the people of Arizona who need it, to the people of New York and California who need it, to the people of Nebraska who need it?
Well, I think there are a few things at play here, Joe. First of all, the White House was simply slow to react, and the president is engaging in revisionist history here. We know that he spent weeks downplaying this crisis, in part because
right, but what are we doing now? What are we doing now is my question. Who's in charge? If they can't do it, they need to bring somebody in who can do it. Who is in charge? Who can tell us truthfully how many ventilators we have ready to go? Who can tell us truthfully when every American who wants a test can get a test? Because we keep hearing, nobody in Ohio can get a test.
Right. Well, part of the problem.
Nobody in Ohio. That's ridiculous. Who's in charge?
That's part of the problem is there's uncertainty as to who is in charge, because the Jared Kushner team, which has been sort of working behind the scenes on this, at times is at odds with the task force headed up by Vice President Pence. There has been some rivalry there. There's been confusion among other government agencies who they should be dealing with. There's been some confusion in the private sector as to who they should be dealing with. And as we hit home earlier, the president invoked this Defense Act yesterday in order to marshal the private sector for this effort, but yet later sort of walked it back somewhat. I mean, it is.
And can you explain that? Hey, Jonathan, can you explain that? What's the inside of that? He invokes the Defense Act, but then later says, well, you know what, I'm not going to use it right now.
Well, even when he invoked it, when he even said he was going to invoke it from the White House, he said, well, if we need it, if things get bad enough. It clearly is.
We need it.
We need it. And he signed it. He did invoke it last night. He signed it last night. So it is in place. But he tries to have it both ways, where he's suggesting I'm a wartime president. He's saying that we're doing all that we can. But at the same time, he's still minimizing the impact of what's happening here. This is an attempt for him to be perhaps too cute by half, where he's saying we need to do these things, but he's also still trying to broadcast to the American public things aren't that bad. And I think also we need to too much has been made of the last few days about his shift in tone. Yes, has he been more somber in the White House briefing room? He has. That should have happened weeks ago. He is still.
That's right.
Much has been made about he's using the phrase Chinese virus to describe this, even though many have described it as racist. Yesterday, he didn't even back off the idea when one White House reporter said that a White House official told her, he called it the Kung flu. And the president wasn't upset by that, another deeply offensive term. And I think that. Go ahead, Mika.
These are the terms that the president at this point is putting out there, and I wouldn't get distracted. We're looking for facts on people who might be dying of the coronavirus at this point.
And by the way, that's a good point, Mika. That's just
it's terrible.
Let me give liberals and progressives and people in the media a tip here. He's poking at you. He wants you to become outraged,
to react to racism,
so you will talk
xenophobia.
So you'll talk about that instead of talking about tests. So you'll talk about that instead of talking about ventilators. It's called a rabbit trail, and yes, it's offensive. But again, we can talk about this in November when the election's in full force. But this is all a distraction.